Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast.
All right.
Doug, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate you coming on. And I just want to start by asking you to tell us about Amy Atwood and what you do for your job there.
Adam, thanks for having me. I'm the sales manager for Amy Atwood Selections based here in Los Angeles. We kind of operate only in the state of California, but we rep a lot of natural wines from throughout the world. Some of the greatest natural wines that you can kind of ever come across. I've worked for Amy for about 6 years. Amy Atwood, I just want to speak about it for a brief second, but she's kind of a legend in our small natural wine world here in California and kind of in the country. And she's
one of the people that is making it happen, like making the natural wine scene the scene that it is.
So she started bringing in these wines about a decade ago. She was one of the handful, I think two or three books at the time representing these wines, and so she's kind of been at it for a long time. And it's kind of a really fun time to be in this position and in this job and in this world of wine, of natural wine. So.
And what's your title with Amy Atwood?
I'm the California sales manager. But title schmeidel. I just get out there. We have a small team. We have a couple that work up in the Bay Area. We have three here in LA, and one down in San Diego, Orange County area. And so it's a pretty small team. I definitely probably just lend a little bit more of a moral support to them. Sometimes this job can be a little wearing, so I think it's more so just about trying to keep a good, healthy morale with the team, and that's kind of my gig. Otherwise, I just hustle. That's it.
How big is the portfolio? I mean, you have a small team, so how many? How big is the portfolio of wineries that are with Amy Atwood?
I mean, at any given time, depending on what's in stock. I mean, a lot of these winemakers are small production, so we get things coming and going pretty frequently. But we're anywhere from a couple hundred to access to 1,000. A lot of the stuff we bring in is mostly just.
Is that SKUs you're talking about?
That's SKUs. Yeah. I mean, more than a few hundred winemakers, a couple thousand SKUs at any given time. I mean, a lot of the times there's also situations where, if you can imagine, a winemaker in Italy is only making 2,000 cases. They're going to sell a little here. Some goes to New York, and by the time Los Angeles gets some, it could be a pretty small batch. But that's also this is also kind of one of the things that's interesting too, is these are all the new markets emerging. So LA has only really come about in the last few years, becoming a really popular natural wine market. I mean, it's really New York, Paris, Copenhagen, Tokyo, London, and Los Angeles, and there's a handful of other smaller cities kind of adopting these styles and this movement and this culture. And so it's really an exciting time, especially in LA right now.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, why has LA not had a wine scene prior to now? I mean, and we're still developing. I mean, but just really, like, I've looked around. I've been to Denver and been like, there are more wineries on one block in Denver where they're not even growing grapes than we have in all of Los Angeles. It's I've go ahead. Sorry.
It's an interesting thing. I mean, there's multiple reasons. I mean, I've been in LA for 20 years now, and I was in the restaurant industry for the majority of that. So, general manager at Cobras and Matadors on Hollywood Boulevard. I worked at Covell with Matthew Canner. I ran Eleni Oyster Bar. I've been around, and so seeing that transition from, you're right, like, sangria, cocktails, drinks. I mean, LA had a huge cocktail resurgence in early 2000. And that really put a lot of bars and built up a whole downtown, kind of lifted the whole downtown up with the advent of all the mixology and all that. And it's interesting though, because I mean, LA has one of the best wine history. It has the oldest wine history of California.
Yeah, I mean, you've read the book City of Vines?
I have not. No.
Oh, it's a really good book, so I'll just put a plug in for it.
All right.
As part of the LA wine scene, I think everybody should read it. City of Vines, and it gives the really comprehensive history of the wine scene in Los Angeles. And I think you're right. Like prohibition was the like nail in the coffin, but I think just the reason it was so pretty much eliminated the Los Angeles wine scene entirely is because it was already going downhill because the property values, like all of downtown
Right.
Los Angeles was vineyards, and then it started growing. And of course, they had, the train came in and they could put basically warehouses and things right next to the train tracks where that they could make a lot money more for a lot more money from than vineyards. And so they
Mm.
just started, pulling out the vineyards and putting in other commercial real estate ventures. And
Well,
then
that makes
prohibition
so
came
that
and
make that
boom.
makes sense that the oldest, I think the oldest California vine is at San Antonio Winery. Kind of. You
Actually, I think there's an older one.
is there?
Yeah, like Jasper and Amy just
Oh,
posted
right.
something on their Instagram from a mission, and it's like a 250-year-old mission vine that looks like, the size of a tree, basically. Like you couldn't even
Yes.
wrap your arms around the trunk of it. And they're going to be making wine from it this year, apparently.
Oh my
Um,
God.
I got a little name droppy here and just wanted to insert that the Jasper and Amy we're talking about are Jasper Dixon and Amy Luftig Vista of Angelino Wine Company, the first winery to open in downtown Los Angeles since Prohibition.
That's the best.
Yeah. And that's the other exciting thing. The Mission Grape is now we're making wine from it again.
I
It's
know, and
happening. I mean, I know
there's
you guys
have
work
you,
with Abe Scherner, right? And he's
yep.
he's just found some really like 100-year-old Mission vineyards that he's working with. Um, and I and who else?
Yeah,
Sabelli Frisch. Do you know
he's about to
Sabelli
move.
Frisch?
I do not, but Abe's
They're
about to
they're
move
not
his
in your
whole. No,
yeah. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I
Abe
said
is
Abe's
about to
about to
move.
move his whole his whole operation to downtown LA.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
no, it's funny. The San Antonio. It's funny you say that about the industrial and the reference to the land is that whether it's the oldest or it's one of the oldest, it is surrounded by
Yeah,
a
for
total
sure.
industrial complex type. It's like San
It
Antonio
is,
Winery is
yeah.
down in the middle of all the crates and the shipping houses and stuff like that. So it's interesting. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that little courtyard in the back of the oh,
right.
no, you're talking about San Antonio. Yeah, yeah.
San
Okay.
Antonio Winery. I mean, it's a bulk producing winery, but it's it's LA legendary. It's been there for a long time. It was one of the handful of places I think that were allowed to produce through Prohibition.
That's
If I'm
right.
not
Yeah, they had
correct.
the contract with the Catholic Church wisely.
Yep, yep. Smart. I think
Very
only a
smart,
handful did.
very smart business. Well, why do you think LA has embraced natural wine so heartily? I mean, what's that about?
I'm constantly intrigued by this question and the answer because it's always going to change. The answer is always going to change. You have this multitude. I always try to just devalue everything to basic things and just cultural, economic. Uh, what are these impacts? How did this happen? Where did the shift come from? What is it? Who like our demographic for the natural wine is generally a began as a younger kind of audience. It was really interesting to kind of try to get these wines in front of sommeliers, trained sommeliers that had flavor profiles and guidance and direction under a certain time and a certain era. I think just on a side note, I feel that what a lot of us consider traditional flavor profiles as far as like this Pinot Noir from California, this big Cabernet from Napa, this buttery Chard. These are trends in wine. If you look at the whole landscape of wine over the last century or so, that moment in time is the trend. What's happening now is kind of a return to what wine used to be. These lower alcohols, these fresher flavors, these not as long elevages. And so you're kind of getting back to this style of wine that was just supposed to be open and drank. It wasn't a prestige item. It wasn't something that had class or representation. It wasn't like a status symbol with a nice car and a nice bottle of Bordeaux from Cheval or whatever, Cheval Blanc. these wines were just made to drink. And I think with, I don't know where it happened or when it happened, but you could put these little landmarks maybe just to make it simple on places opening at certain times in Los Angeles. You have Lou Amador. He opened Lou Bottle Shop, not the bottle
Yeah.
shop, but the restaurant many, many years ago. He
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
really, really one of the first to not
Right.
only like show LA these wines, but he earned the trust. And that's something you really learn about this business is it really comes down to the individual person. You have Jill Bernheimer at Domain LA that opened her
Yeah.
shop somewhere around not too long after. And so you had these little moments and landmarks where you had people, individual people making an impact, and you can really point to those moments. And now, I mean, you have some Bar and Garden in Culver City, who focuses mostly on natural and organic wine. You have Silver Lake Wine, obviously, was a huge, huge impact on the natural wine scene. You can, I remember being in
Yeah.
the restaurant industry and just in Silver Lake, and something as simple as this, it was about maybe 12 or 13 years ago. All of a sudden, there was this little, you started seeing Gruner Veltliner everywhere. And it wasn't a wine, it's a wine that we kind of consider common and it's a liter bottle, it's easy to drink. But at the time, not many people knew Gruner Veltliner. It was mostly just like what we were talking about: Sauv Blanc, Pinot, maybe a adventurous Rioja drinker. Maybe somebody would have some more Italian education, but it really wasn't the breadth of knowledge you had. So all of a sudden, I'm working in the restaurants and I start seeing people, hey, do you have a Gruner Veltliner? And I was like, huh, that's a odd request. And you started seeing it. And then you know what happened is I go to Silver Lake Wine and they're throwing around a liter Gruner Veltliner for $13, and the equation of something new and fresh but affordable and natural. I mean, all of a sudden you're hitting a price point that a lot of domestic winemakers cannot hit. And so I think purely by default, you start having these styles of wine, which are a return: bright, fresh, clean, lesser alivage, lower alcohol, lower sugar. I mean, you can drink a liter, 11.5%, 12% alcohol, no problem. Go back to work, easy. So
Many
I just,
times. Many
I'm, I,
times.
I'm totally going off on this, but there's a lot of these factors, and it's just like it's interesting. But I think you can point to these handful of places that really helped promote, and that the timing was great. Amy was there right ahead of it to supply the wines. These shops opened. You had these individuals. You had Randy and April at Silver Lake. You had these people that had intent. They weren't just trying to bring in wines to sell. They were trying to bring in wines to share, and that was a huge pivotal moment, I think, as far as you can point to those moments. And now here we are almost 15 years later, 10 years later, and these guys are still kind of running the show in town. So they're completely invaluable to us and the winemakers we represent.
Nice. Well, I want to dig into a couple things that you brought up. um, so, and I love the values behind natural wine. I mean, I've seen a need for, wine that is coming from vineyards that are not basically poisoned with a bunch of chemicals, that is grown in a way that is like as an organism, like a natural organism, treating it holistically, treating it regeneratively, organically, biodynamically, trying to elicit like natural, to me, starts in the vineyard. Like, you want a natural ecosystem, not a synthetic ecosystem, not a industrial ecosystem that you're, just using the soil as a medium for the chemistry that you want. Um, and then all the way up to low intervention. Like, you want to express that vineyard when you have this beautiful natural piece of land that you're growing these beautiful grapes on naturally, then you want to express that. You don't want to like bastardize it with a bunch of additives or industrial processes to refine the wine into something. And it's also this embracing of variation and change. Like, we put a date and a place on
Yeah.
bottles of wine for a reason. That's unique to wine. It's it's not beer, it's not from a recipe, it's not it's not liquor. It's not made the same from a recipe year after year so you can taste exactly the same thing. It's like we bottle change, and so we should expect change. And so that's okay. Like it doesn't have to be a consistent experience from year to year. It should be wild and new and fresh. Um and all that I love. The thing that like so you can then I here's the thing that baffles me a little bit. So you and I love that it's sort of eliminating the class, like it's an attempt to take class out of the wine.
Uh-huh.
However, so you're pointing to some factors that are like lower alcohol, fresher, less time aging. um all of those things are don't necessarily, I mean, you could make a 36-month aged 15% cabernet that is done with everything else that I said before, like a beautiful organic vineyard with no
Of
intervention,
course.
low
Yeah.
sulfites and everything else. So why is it that natural is a style more than just its values? Like it's almost more of a religion rather than a, I don't know, than a I don't know how to put it, but you know what I'm
Well,
saying. Like
no, I think it's simple.
it's
I
more
think
like a
it's
doctrine than a scientific, yeah, like
no,
it's more like a
it's ew. That's what my dad drank. That's straight up what it is. It's
right.
like it's so simple.
It's
I mean,
right, right.
I'm reducing it to a very basic value, but it essentially is like, oh no, that's what my mom drank. I don't.
It's
I.
counterculture
It's
at the
counterculture.
most basic level.
Yeah, and I mean,
Okay,
this is.
that
I
makes
mean,
sense. That's actually a good way
it's
to
not just
understand it.
it's not just one thing here, but it's like, what was the first thing that you drank? You, Adam. What was the very first thing that you drank? Like, did you
Wine
steal?
wise,
Yeah, anything. Where'd you get it? Did you get it from your dad? Did you get
oh
it from your
god,
mom? Did you steal it?
probably was nipping some bottles from my neighbor's parents' liquor cabinet when I was like 12, and I don't
Right.
even remember. I don't
Almost
even
every
remember.
single human in America's alcohol begins with some stealing of parents' booze, right?
Right.
So,
Yes.
to a degree, otherwise, I'm sure we, like you did, we stole some friends' booze. And so, anyway, our exposure to those flavor profiles at that young age, I don't know very many people that had their very first sip of booze and was like, "Oh yeah, dude, that's delicious. I'm gonna hit this all day." Yeah, maybe
Right,
one or
right.
two. We know those people. Thank God we
Well, if it
weren't
was
them.
peach schnapps,
Yeah, right. Or if it were White Claw. If I had White Claw when I was
right?
12, woof, that would have been a different story. Um, no, but I'm joking a little bit, but there is this counterculture aspect to it, and I think sometimes there was this whole. I mean, even I experienced when I grew up in Napa. I grew up a white man. I grew up with privilege. I grew up working in wineries, and I mean, I didn't get handed anything. I made the choice to go work in wineries. Growing up in Napa, you can either just work in town, but when you're a kid, and if you can get a ride up to the wineries, you can make really good money. So my first job was breaking down boxes at Sutter Home in the in the cellar, and I went from there. I worked at Trefethen. I worked at all these places, just picking up knowledge over the summer and doing this and that. And I was trying to learn firsthand, and so I would ask anybody I could questions that I got to work at Trefethen, and there's a guy named Tony Baldini, and the Baldini family is a pretty good agricultural legacy in Napa as far as being some of the top vignerons at the time. And so he would come in and I would just pick his brain. I was 18 at the time and he was a farmer. And I'll never forget shaking this guy's hands. This guy's hands were just leather, just gnarled hard leather. And I looked at my hands and I'm sitting there in my khakis and a polo shirt with the softest little baby hands. And here's this man in the wine world that knows every single thing about what's going on in the dirt and that vineyard. And that's the guy you listen to. He
Yeah.
was wonderful as far as sharing some things with the young me. But at the same time, the guys that were, I was in that position, for lack of better terms, with the soft hands and the suits, they weren't, for some reason, as willing to share their knowledge as somebody like Tony. And it became an impression. And again, these are just my personal stories. And maybe I ended up generalizing to a degree, but I sought the people like Tony out from that day forward and not the guys with the soft hands and the suits and ties in the classroom and the books. And I
Right.
made it my point. And I did the books. I did the books myself. I'm a Psalm school dropout. I got halfway through it. Didn't really like how I was being told things. I'd already been in the wine world and already had a couple guys like Tony Baldini. And my uncle's a huge influence too. He's a farmer up in Alexander Valley. He grows Pinot and Merlot, and Chard. And he's a big influence too. But these farmer aspects is something I was able to identify as a better resource, or at least a resource where I could understand the attitude better than I could the guys trying to, what do you smell? And I would say something, and they would be like, no, you're wrong. And I was like, well, I mean, I'm a kid. Yeah, I get it. But, I swear to God, I smell rhubarb or cherry or whatever. They'd be like, no, you smell blackberry. And I was like, okay. But that was, I don't know. And that was,
Wait,
I had
who
these
was saying that to you? These were the who was?
I used to work at Mustards, okay? Mustards,
Oh
mustard.
yeah.
I worked
Yeah.
I was just a hustling kid my whole life, and so I worked in wineries, I worked in restaurants. These are summer jobs, usually working
No,
both at multiple
there was a
times.
famous chef attached to Mustards, right? Was that
Cindy Paulson. Cindy
okay?
Paulson. Yeah,
Okay.
she still got Mustards. She did Cindy's Backdoor Kitchen, and she's still
Okay.
operating. Yeah. Um,
And so you were working there, and these were the Psalms. The
These are some of the Psalm teams. Just kind of, we would have some staff tastings, and it was just general disagreements. But at my age, where I'm really trying to kind of find,
so they conveyed a sense of there's a right and wrong about wine, rather
yeah,
than
right. Which
yeah,
which
that's
as
that's
which as
unfortunate.
we which as we evolve with anything, we realize there really is so many rights and wrongs and multiple ways to get
Right.
to the same place. And I mean, that's really why I love what I do.
Yeah,
There's
it's
just,
about exploration. I mean,
oh,
one of the biggest joys of wine is that you're gonna find new stuff all the time. Every vintage, there's new stuff. It's fantastic.
it's
Anyway, sorry.
all so new.
I
But no,
don't
but
get
you're
me
right.
started.
No, but also to some of the things you were saying about your relationship to the land and the viticulture and having it, and I mean that's paramount. And I mean, I don't want to get digressed too much, but one of the best lessons I've ever had, and one of the privileges of this job, which is amazing, is the getting to travel, getting to meet these winemakers firsthand, and getting to
Mm,
hear their philosophies from their mouth. And a lot of them, I think we spoke before, and I gave a silly metaphor, but it was like a great ape, and thousands of years ago, a great ape in Africa puts a stick into an anthill and extracts ants and learns how to eat. And the same occurrence happens with another primate, like in another part of the world, in Asia or in Europe somewhere at the time. And they've never met, they've never done anything, and yet they've managed to kind of come to the same evolutionary period and figure out a way to apply their tools. And when I when I speak to natural winemakers, as I've never spoken to each other, and I know there's a basis of this, but a lot of the things said are very similar. They want these connection to the earth. They want to have their hands on their product. They want to know every single aspect, from that vine in
mm,
the dirt to that juice in the glass, and see how it grows and see how it changes and see what age barrel does what, all while not participating really to any more degree than maybe trimming here,
observing. Yeah.
observing, right?
Yeah, I call it escorting. I call myself a wine escort. I love that idea
Well,
that
and it's
we're looking for connection.
this is one of my favorite parts of the job, is having people like you come along that are just getting started. And we've had a couple too: Megan Bell, Joe Swick, James Flores. These guys in Santa Cruz and Oregon. We've been able to watch them evolve and grow. Jody, and Emily Bricks in San Diego. Just watch them grow into these amazing winemakers. Now that we've worked with them for several years, and just seen them kind of figure things out and get to a point to where their wines are fully natural, but just unbelievably clean and healthy, and have wonderful breadth, flavor profiles. So for me, I'm super excited to see where you're going to go. Just start here and go from there, because I don't know, the philosophy's there. You're saying a lot of the same things these Austrian guys say, and the Italian guys say, and the French.
That's
So
funny.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
awesome.
So this is maybe a good segue. How how important is organic to natural wine?
it's a
I'm
tough.
setting you up for some follow-up questions
Yeah.
too.
I mean, it's this is a tough one because I have to put on the consumer hat for this one, and I think for us in our world, we kind of we can identify a vineyard pretty quickly if it's been taken care of or not. And there is a certified FDA organic labeling, so there are rules to that term that you can't really mess around with.
Right.
So,
But yeah.
but here's the thing for the consumer is there are, and this is what I try to encourage our winemakers to do, is to use terms that infer a sustainable model or at least a reference to natural. And there's tons of terms. I mean, we in California use dry farm a lot or old vine. And those are terms we
Yeah.
see a lot. And a lot of the old vines, they're old vines. You don't have to do anything. They're living on their own.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful, wonderful website if you really want to geek out called I think it's the American Vine Society or the California Heritage Vine Society.
Yeah.
Heritage
I
Vine Society. Heritage Vine Society is a listing of all of the old heritage vines still active in California and who's using them and who's making wine from them. And these are vines that you don't. They're living on their own. I guess the metaphor. I always try to find the best metaphors for vines, but if how do you start? How do you grow a vine organically? How do you begin to grow a vine? From rootstock to a healthy old organic vine. Like you have to take
mm,
care of it for a little while, but eventually you're going to try to get this vine to take care of itself. And I've heard
right.
winemakers discuss this timeline, 2 to 3 years, and then on the opposite side, and not to begrudge any farming method, but you will have some vines that still are watered and sprayed, and they're 30 years old. And
Hmm.
the metaphor for that is like if it's like having children. If you train your children right to be responsible and take care of themselves, they're going to go on their own and live their life. But if you keep feeding your kids, they're going to be in your basement for 30 years of your life.
Yeah.
They're going to
Yeah.
get fat. They're going to be like, "Ma, is dinner ready yet?" It's like that. And the metaphor for those vines is that sometimes you have to like manipulate. You have to
Well,
really,
and
yeah,
it's true. I mean, and part of it is part of it is the commercialization of grape growing, because there was
absolutely.
a time when you planted a vineyard, you researched the space, you knew what the annual rainfall was, you knew what the water holding capacity of the soil was, and if it didn't give the vines enough, you wouldn't plant there.
Just going back to what you said earlier about the natural process of wine and how the season is going to affect flavor profiles. It's a fruit. It's going to taste different if a year is different.
Yeah.
I completely with you. But trying to get your average consumer who may not be so into wine to where they're open to like just throwing $25-$30 at a bottle and see what it tastes like. They're going to want
Yes,
that their Fetzer. That's like
that's
13
right.
bucks. I know what it's like.
Yeah.
It's going to taste good. Da 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 to them.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
the yeah, that's the person we're trying
It's
to change.
yeah. Well, do you think you can? do
So maybe, I mean, there's some wines out there that you can trick people into that are fully natural. But I mean, on the label, going back to what the label, dry farm, uh, old vine, terms like unfined, unfiltered. I think having an exact alcohol percentage to the second decimal is a wonderful thing. You're starting to see it a little bit more lately. It's a little funny, a little joke
hmm
in the wine world, but if you look at alcohol percentage, it goes to an exact number. That's a natural process. It's a finished and finite process of fermentation, so they can get to the exact number.
will people actually change their tastes, or should we? I mean, I'll speak from the personal dilemma that I face as a winemaker, and you're on the other side of selling the wine, so I'm sure know where I'm coming from, which is, I mean, obviously, I want every year the wine that I make to be delicious. I don't want it to be flawed. I don't want it to be just as like biting into a lemon. I don't want somebody's
Yeah,
experience with my wine to be negative, obviously. And there is that sense of, do I make a Pinot in a pretty tradition, like what has become a traditional way, a pretty standard way that people have gotten used to. I mean, because really, it comes down to, when do you pick the grapes? It's like, do I pick
Yeah.
early and have this really, like really acidic, bright thing that's, maybe fresher, maybe whatever, but maybe is not as pleasant. It's not as hedonistic. It's not as plush in the mouth. And people, it's, maybe there's not any, you have, if there is any residual sugar, it's overcome by the acid that's still left over. Or do you go the other side and make something that's a little bigger, a little higher alcohol, a little plusher, a little lower acid, that's a little more approachable? And because people, like, that is like the common drinker's preference, at least at the moment, because and it's like, I want to do both. Basically, I want to have like two separate lines, one that is like, appeals to this kind of person, and one that appeals to this kind of person, because I personally don't have a judgment about that. I don't think it's like a better wine if I'm lower alcohol or higher alcohol.
Well, I would ask you this: like, what do you want to drink? What would you want out of that?
Yeah,
You want both though. You
I'm a
want.
little, Jekyll and Hyde-ish. I like,
Well, I mean, they
like,
both have a different context. They both will probably have a different
exactly.
audience.
And when you think of wine as food, then it's part of your meal. Then it really depends on the day and what you're eating with it, and
Totally.
who you're drinking it with, and like how hot it is outside. What time of year it is comes into play.
Well,
So all of
yeah.
that is.
So these are some of the beautiful things these I get to interact with these winemakers. Is that what you do see? Is they really, most of them create wines reflective of their personality and their area. And so you will go to parts of Spain where it's hot, it's hot as balls all year round, and so they make nice, fresh, light reds of from Bobal, or these really unique um, Catalonian grapes. I mean, you can
Mm,
go to like cold parts of Styria, and they'll make you know 2 year on the lees Sauvignon Blanc to give it texture and body and weight, and yet it's still
mm,
fresh and clean from the process. And so, I love the idea. I mean, let's be frank. You're in this beautiful world of like being a agricultural artist. I mean, you interact with the earth, you make a product that is essentially a result of your relationship with nature. It's these basic carnal human fights or agreements, and it's sometimes you could base it up that conventional winemaking is the controlling of nature. Natural winemaking is working with it, observing it, as you said earlier. And so
yeah.
there's an art to that. And I think throughout life we've seen artists who make art for themselves, and people are drawn to that, whether it be inextricably way they've tapped into subconscious, or they straight up just make art for the people to admire and like, knowing that colors and this and shapes are really going to resonate just generally with the psychology of the human mind. And so I think really, if you get, like I said, I really do try to devalue everything to these basic human things, and it really does help me make some choices in where I want to be and what I want to represent and what I want to do. I mean, I grew up in Napa. I grew up with a conventional wine side. I grew up with all of that, and yet I want to focus and live in this natural wine world because it's just there really is just a closer connection to what it's all about. And I'm not knocking that other side. It's just also to devalue it. I mean, this is a very you know personal driven uh, process with your relationship with the grape into the glass, and your motivation probably isn't to make a ton of money. So a lot of the winemaking in some of the worlds that we're dealing with are their motivation is to make money. And we all have to make money. We all have to, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is trying to. This is what I
Yeah.
do for my life. This is how I work. I work with relationships with nature, and so
Yep.
my advice would be to make a wine for yourself, but also, like you said, recognize the popularity of certain styles. I mean, packaging
Yeah.
is something I did not used to believe in. I thought packaging,
Oh, let's
schmackaging.
talk about that. I will.
But
There was one quote I heard yesterday. I'll before we transition, but it was, yeah, we make a bunch of wine for ourselves, and we only sell what we can't drink.
right, yeah, yeah. I mean,
Uh,
that's it, right? I think
I
some
love
of the
that.
stories I've heard from some of the importers too. Some of the stories were like, we'll present a wine and it'll have like a bottle cap on it, and the buyer will be like, "Oh, did they do that on purpose? Oh, that's cool. The label and it's clear bottle. Like that was a good choice." And then you talk to the importer, like, "Hey, how did that wine come about?" And they're like, "Oh, it was sitting in a tank. They usually just have the old guys in the village come around and fill up their growlers. I told them they should bottle it. They didn't want to. All they had were these liter bottles sitting around that had been there for a couple years. They didn't know what to do with. And I said, well, put it in there and put it in that and charge that. And then they did, and now it's like one of the most popular wines in the natural wine market out here. And
It
so
was all
sometimes,
just
yeah, just all just like, oh, well, you got those over there. Those are sitting there. Yeah, we bought those for something else. We didn't know what to do with them, and then that's a lot of times how these things come about. It's really kind of fascinating. But
so. In terms of packaging, what have you seen? What I mean, what lessons have you learned? What would you transfer to winemakers and other people who are trying to package and sell their goods?
right, I mean, well, first the contrast would be like, what is the packaging as we know? It's usually pretty nice. Like, what's your favorite in your mind? If you close your eyes, like, what's the bottle you see from maybe 10 years ago that had a cool packaging? I always think of Frog's Leap. Frog's Leap always pops in my head.
I love Frog Sleep. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
pretty elegant and simple and
yeah,
nice little. Yeah. Um,
but not necessarily like a Bordeaux type bottle with the chateau and the.
no, I mean, I love the look of those things. I especially love the look of like burgundy labels with the extra little
Yeah,
oval label up at the top
right.
on the shoulder of the bottle. And I don't know, there's some, it's probably more just the associations I have with burgundy bottles, having been in love with Pinot Noir for years and years and years. So but then you look at them on a shelf, and if you don't know a lot about burgundy, it's just a sea of letters. It's
Yeah,
like like when you see one by itself and somebody's pouring it at dinner, you're like, "Oh, that's classy and nice." But when you're in a retail shop and you look, you're like, "I have
I
no,
have no
like,
idea.
just
Yeah,
like spin me around and blindfold me, and I'll pick one out." Like,
that's side note. That was a fun moment in my life when you could finally read a fucking burgundy bottle. You're like, Jesus, I actually know what all
right?
this shit means.
Like, I
But
actually know the
yeah,
rows from that that clo that they come from
right,
or whatever.
right. I'm
That's
like,
yeah.
oh, that's Premier Crew with the one ER. Okay, I got you. Okay. I'm like, what's a oneer? What's a oneer, man? Um, but
That's so funny. That's true.
now
Yeah.
you contrast that today, and also the green bottle, the dark bottle to protect the wine. Important. You only ever saw red wine in dark bottles. White wine was in clear bottles. That's about it. And so now you're seeing the wine now. And
Yeah.
I had a couple winemakers that were he does the art for his wine, and he said something very profound, very serious. He's like, everybody will drink with their eyes first, and
I love that.
yeah, right, drink with your eyes first. And so to that point, when you're putting, like you said, when all those wines are on the shelf, and your average consumer, even myself, what is your eye drawn to? Is it drawn to that burgundy label? Is it drawn to that chateau label? Is it drawn to these clear bottles that show the liquid, that are just beautiful, bright, clean? That tends to be these wines that resonate. When I, as a salesman, can take a picture of a wine that's in a clear bottle, has a cool label, it's much easier to have the buyer understand that just by the visualization of the liquid as opposed to just the bottle.
Mm,
And so those are little things that I recognize, just kind
I
of, and
love
it's
that.
also it's also like transparency. I mean, I think that's really one of the efforts we're trying to do here. Is like there's a lot of these terms, these organic, we don't quite know, and sustainable, we don't quite know. What does natural really mean? But
Yeah.
if you can be transparent, here's the ingredients, here's the juice, here's the label, nothing too complex.
I'm
I
glad
think,
you brought that up.
yeah,
So let's talk about ingredients. How many, like, is this a I don't know. I should. I mean, the bigger question is: do you at Amy Atwood have requirements for the wineries that you bring in? Like, and if you do, what are they? What are those like requirements that they must meet to be
I
considered part of the family?
mean, we definitely lean on the natural side of things, but we do have some wines that are under the conventional winemaking method to where there was some certain yeast added. So, I mean, as far as the full natural goes, we don't have any chemicals in our wines, but there are some wines that we have some added yeasts. And so
Yeah,
for those that maybe don't know, if you're doing natural wine, you are supposed to use a natural yeast that comes basically on the grape,
on yeah.
or the winemaker can actually have a coup de pie, or what is it called? What is it, you know?
Oh yeah, like where they've already started a bucket going and
Yeah, basically have a yeast
they
starter, right?
yeah, which is usually also still from like grapes that came, and were just crushed and allowed to ferment naturally with
Right.
the
It's usually
natural
usually
yeast
they'll
in there.
just do a quick pass. They'll get that fermentation going, and then they'll do the harvest and use that starter to help promote
Right.
fermentation. So anyway, I mean, there's using the natural yeast, but it is another method. But if you use an inoculated yeast, a yeast that is designed to promote fermentation,
Yep.
just by
Yep.
the simple definition of natural wine, nothing added, nothing taken away. I mean, that is at its basis soul. And
Right.
so even if you are taking something that has a natural derivative, you are adding it. And so there are some who would disqualify you. I don't think anybody's going to be, I don't know, natural wine police. I guess we are having natural wine police. So
Yeah, no, for sure.
I mean, need
Well, and I
to.
wonder, like, when we get into the point where there is an actual certification, like they're doing in Europe now, like, this is because I just had this conversation with, I think, one of the largest biodynamic wineries in the world, but definitely the US. It's Montanore Estate up in Oregon. And I was asking about, can you add in biodynamics, can you add yeast, or because I kind of was under the assumption that it was very similar to natural, that it had to be native fermentation. um, but he said they do this process where they bring in, like you said, basically the starters. They'll
Yeah,
do a, like an early pass, and they'll start maybe like 10 or more, a dozen different little batches of natural fermentation, and then essentially they're doing like a natural selection. The ones that are doing the best, they then propagate. Like, so
yeah,
they're doing a native fermentation, but they've already eliminated the fermentations that are not going to perform well, because they're at such a large level. I mean, these are hundreds of thousands of gallons of wine that they're fermenting. They really can't take the risk of something, you know like of a stuck fermentation and all the
right,
thing, an
right.
off fermentation. So
And that should be noted too.
that
That's the luxury of. I mean, that's the, I shouldn't say the luxury, but that's the problem, or the one of the battles that natural wine producers have. That's why you don't have these mass productions of them, because of this exact scenario. It's like total yeast. So
right.
I for some reason I have no problem with that. I mean, the yeast is
Right.
native of their place.
Right.
They
Right.
want to have a secure yeast that they can help promote. I have no problem with that, and so I don't even know why in my mind I would have a problem with inoculated yeast and not that. It's pretty similar, but I guess it's coming from a different place. But even so, even to that point, it's like these terms and these, what we
Right.
allow is
Right.
kind of per discussion based. I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds reasonable. Yes,
Why do you think that there is so much dogmatism around natural wine, though? Like, I mean, I guess maybe that's been my problem about it. Is you've already used the term police. Like, why are people so up in arms, like so defensive about their, like, why is there such a right and wrong
I
aspect
think
to it, instead of like, oh,
I think it
like,
depends on who you talk to.
let's talk about it and debate it.
It depends on who you talk to. And so
Okay.
when you talk to the farmer, the more often what I've seen is the farmer is the one defining this for us. And it's not that he's out here being like, hey, you should say this, you should say this. They are simply saying, this is what I do, this is how I do it, and this is my intent, and this is how I learned it. Now, our job is to go and take this out into the world and see if we can translate it. So when we talk to the next person who might be a buyer or somebody that demands a certain level of information, I mean, let's be frank. I mean, half of this wine world is based upon these definitive things. Like, it's definitive that Latoche is a great wine. I wanted to da 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 da.
Mm,
And it's like
right.
it's what you said earlier. It's like the definitive thing of natural wine is there's nothing definitive, and it's hard for people to really kind of grasp it. I mean, it exists in the culture that we are now, in this young culture that is excited to try new things. I mean, can't. I mean, orange wine. Everybody just wants orange wine right now. I don't think people. I mean, I actually literally had a. I can't say anything. I had a.
Have you ever had any bad orange wine that you did not like? Do you like orange wine generally?
I like all wine. I'm with you. I think there's a context to every single bottle of
Yeah.
wine. You just have to find it. And I mean, you can.
Okay, I was sorry. I was fishing for maybe what you were afraid to say there.
No, no. I was afraid to say that I actually had a prominent uh, wine person. I'm trying to be so democratic right now. Who by all accounts is somebody I had looked to as pretty knowledgeable and informed, and this is a year ago. He said, "So this is made with oranges. There's oranges in here," and this person did not know
Wow.
that orange wine was simply a reference to color and skin, and not an actual
Yeah.
orange added in the wine. Which I'm not making fun of anybody. It's just one of those things where
It's so new still,
it's so
basically.
new still, and so there still needs to be some definition. But no, I'm a
And maybe the name is misleading. Maybe it's better to call it, skin
skin
contact
contact.
white or
Yes,
something
sir.
like.
Yes. So that's
It's
that.
funny, although I have heard the joke where somebody's come in and asked for a skin contact wine, and they're like, or a skin contact white, and the person pointed to the entire red section,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
technically it is. um,
Yeah. So this is where you get the stupid wine jokes. These are stupid dad wine jokes.
that is a
It's
total
like
stupid dad
oh,
wine
you
joke.
want skin contact? Well, here's a red. Yeah, for sure. But no, our job is to try to help and explain these things and relate these things to people. So yeah, by the time we get to the winemaker philosophy, which is really beautiful, and I've actually teared up a couple times listening to these people talk about their relationship with the earth and their family and what they do and how they do it, why they do it. You take that back to well, you take it back to Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is a big hustle bustle city, and there's a lot of people out here that like you said, need to get their hands in the dirt, need to get out to a farm, and need to get into some agriculture. I think there's a relationship that they're missing. It's a connection, and so my job is to try to connect that to them. And sometimes I think journalists get a hold of this stuff, and your average consumer, we're just trying to define these things, and they're just really hard to define because it really is there. I think there's a basic philosophy, but it really is up to the individual to kind of help us define these things, the farmer in particular.
That context and that connection, yeah, really opened my eyes. It helps you understand the wine and getting the sense of that wine and literally drinking it in the vines where it came from with the people who live with it and make it is how do you translate that?
It's
How do you
hard. It's
translate that to
hard
Los Angeles?
because that's where it all makes sense. That's where it all makes sense,
Yeah,
and it's hard, but there is a way to do it. It's like I said, it goes back to the relationships you have, um, but you a lot of the things I learned about, I learned a lot from the customer service aspect, working in the wine bars, working in the restaurants. You learn so much about people's palates and how they talk about wine. And your reference to palate is spot on. It's like a lot of the palates growing up. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at earlier with what you drank from your parents' cabinet, or like what you were exposed
right.
to. What have I used to tell this story about view the palate as a muscle. Like some people are born with a gift, just like some people can jump and run fast. Some people have to train and earn it. The palate is the same way. And
Hmm.
so what you train your palate on can completely create your flavor profiles that you may or may not even be aware of. So when I started getting into the customer service, I stopped talking about wine and I started talking about person. Would make people very uncomfortable sometimes. I don't normally have to preface it with like I'm not going to talk about wine. I want to talk about you for a second, but I know about wine. I think you do too. But let me try to find you something nice It was
Right.
it worked. I didn't do it a lot, but it was one of those things that kind of got to the point where the majority of us use a handful of things to condition our palate on a daily. It's usually coffee, tea, Diet Coke, which is my father. My father would drink tons of Diet Coke. Um, Coffee, tea, Diet Coke. What kind of cocktail you drinking if you smoke? And then there was the always once in a while there was a very rare I only drink water person, which ugh,
Wow.
they're boring. But I'm kidding. But like, what like? So do you participate in one of those things like coffee, tea? Um, what's your cocktail go to? Like, had a rough
Y-
day, coming off of work, you just want to.
These are the questions that you're asking people,
This
or
is
are
what I
you
would ask
asking
people,
me?
and I'll ask you this
Yeah.
too, but it doesn't necessarily work on wine people. It doesn't necessarily work on people that have.
Yeah.
How do I say
I'm
this?
a.
So, like, drink and eat a lot, have exposed their palate to a lot of things. It usually works for people that are just like, I just want
You
my
mean
Pinot
palate
Gris.
sluts like
Yes.
me?
If I could just take anything that'll come your way. Jesus, dirty palate slut.
Yes. No, it's true. That and they there's now these online um I guess portals, they start by quizzing you and they try to
Right.
dial in their recommendations based on your answers to their quizzes, which is really trying to dial in your palate.
And I and I,
And so you're saying that's what the approach that you take now in terms of working with customers, working with wine buyers, is you learn to ask questions first rather than make
yeah.
recommendations first.
What's your goal? What are you trying to achieve? What do you want to express? One of the things that's really important from the buyer standpoint is, is this person present? I still go back to the sommelier or the person on the floor being present. Those are the people that are able to translate to their following, their regular customer base, what they like, and a lot of these people have return customers, and they'll just walk in eventually and be like, hey, what do you got? What do you got that's new? You gave me this thing last time. And that's complete
Yeah.
aside from sales. That's just trust of the community. It's trust of your people. It's trust of the people that come in. I mean, let's face it, the wine world is still just, it's unbelievably populated. There's so many, so many SKUs, so
Yeah.
many wines, so many makers. And so for your average consumer, I think the, the value of having a Lou or a Jill or a Zach at Tabula, or to have an Eric at Melody, or have somebody that they can walk into and just be like, hey, what are you feeling today? And then they walk out and they're happy. I mean, that is a huge equation too.
Yeah.
So um,
That's
anyway,
great.
I just got caught up promoting everybody.
No, I can say a lot of good about many of them as well. Jill's been super helpful to me. She's the one that was like, "You should think about clear bottles," and I was like, "Really?"
Yeah,
Man, I went back and forth and back and forth. I looked at, like, I did all this research about how light can change the flavor, and like the different colors. Like amber is supposedly the most protective of light, and even better than the dark green. And then I was like, all right, I'll do clear.
we have a we
'Cause
have a guy in Italy that does a really light blue, really really light
yeah,
blue.
yeah. That's
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
I
It's
just think
like
I
it
just think also it's a metaphorical thing just for the whole what we're trying to do. We're trying to be
exactly. Yeah.
transparent. We're trying to show you like
Yeah.
you come to the vineyard, see how we do this, see what we do. Like to ask me questions. It's like it's one of those things. I think we're trying to define these things, and I just think Diamond's be juxtaposed to that old Psalm world. And again, I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but we've all been in a restaurant where there's been a Psalm coming over explaining shit and just being like, dude, I just thank you for your expansive knowledge on that
Yeah.
wine. Um, but at the same time, we just kind of want to deconstruct that attitude. And again, I'm not knocking it. It's really important to have authoritative people on all fields, but I think in the wine world, it's just a time now to where it should be more accepting, should be more open. It's a really rewarding position, and I absolutely love it. But I will never, ever, ever stop learning new things. And I mean, I just learned about you and what you're doing here, and I'm super, super excited for you and what you can participate in this LA thing kind of coming up. We have like you said,
Oh
Jasper
yeah.
downtown. We got Abe Schoner coming in, got Adam Vervulis in Pasadena. So there's a lot of stuff happening in LA with wine right now. It's super exciting. So
Yeah, it is. It is. Thanks. I am excited. I'm scared and excited, but mostly excited. I mean,
Should be.
my mind is. I just I feel like LA is such a blank slate. Like I go for walks. I live in South Central, and like I live like at the base of the Baldwin Hills, and Wendy and I were walking up the hill doing like an exercise walk, and I was like, I should talk to these people about leasing their hillsides and putting terraced vineyards in there. Like, I'm like, this would be perfect. Like
Yeah,
these
why
hillsides
not?
are like there's just wasted land in the
And
center of LA that would be like there's this beautiful wind corridor that blows through like right across those hills. Anyway, I
no, but
digress. But yeah,
but
like
but I was just thinking this. I was just thinking this morning, or caught a little marine layer, and I'm all the way in Lincoln Heights, so it's pretty far inland. But there's definitely some. I mean, I think you'll probably get it out that in South Central. Get that little early morning marine layer to help give that
oh yeah,
moisturizer
for
shift.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're I mean, where we are, it's actually like a the coastal climate comes pretty far inland because we're right in the like the basin, the LA basin, so it creates this channel that funnels the wind right along those hills that create the Baldwin Hills and the
yeah.
like where where Culver City and all that is, and it really like we get a beautiful breeze every afternoon that like cools everything down.
Baldwin Hills
Um,
AVA sounds pretty nice. Sounds
that's what
pretty.
I was thinking. That's exactly right.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I love it. So, final couple questions. So how should a winery or somebody who's how should a winery prepare for working with a distributor? How should they like set themselves up for success? Like what
Um,
expectations should they have and what's the best way to
yeah. Our whole role for you would be to do the work that you may not have time to do. Um, like I said, Amy's been here in LA longer than she's been operating. I've been in LA in the restaurant industry for 20 years, and we have that's basically what our job is to know everybody and know everything. So it's kind of our job to make sure we can communicate to everything. But that's our job, to know all the accounts, to know the movements, to know where these wines will work, how they work, and that's something that may take you just as a small individual winemaker time to figure out. We had a
Okay.
young winemaker, um, now on her third vintage with us, and so she'll know what I'm talking about. But she came out here for Raw Fair, the first Raw Fair. I think it was two
Oh
years
yeah.
ago, and brand new.
As to show her wares
She
basically.
got
She
to show her
participated.
wares. She participated. She was
Awesome.
in, but she was literally brand new, and nobody really knew her. And we were trying to get her involved, and it was kind of this really. I admit it was really, we do feel very protected of our winemakers, and when they come to town, we really do want to take care of them and show them a good time. It really is that. It really is like we want to take care of you and make sure you're happy and good, and go to the bars, go to the restaurants. Well, when they're open. And so we had a situation where we had many winemakers, and everybody was getting along, but this one in particular just was so brand new and so new that nobody knew her, and so she kind of just. I likened it to I'm a basketball player, so I likened it to maybe like when Michael Jordan lost to Detroit. He's not going to allow it to happen the next year. Like the next year, like that year, it's not the right metaphor, but she just wasn't able to participate at the level I think she wanted to, or what we had hoped for her to do, because nobody knew
uh,
her. But she had done a great job. She had planted some seeds. She had met some people. The wines were fantastic. And then she came, and then we did a market visit maybe about 6 months later with her new releases. Wines went great. People fell in love with her. They're like, "Oh, I remember you. You were at the thing," and da da da. Now her wines are allocated. They sell out immediately. People ask for them on a frequent basis, but it was mostly due to her coming out here and being present, kind of suffering through some of the that little maybe hurdle we all have to get through, just so people get to know
uh,
you and understand you and see where you're coming from and see if you're authentic and see if you're the real deal. And so
that's
that's
great.
kind of a little process. But now
Do you
she,
think the raw wine festival tasting thing is a valuable thing for people to get involved in?
I do. I do. I think
Great.
it's really the only opportunity. Like I said, I mean, if you can,
Now there are requirements to that. You have to
yeah,
meet certain requirements, right? So,
yes. So
and I
Isabelle Legeron runs it. She's very prominent. I think she's actually helped to some degree help define some of the natural wine laws that France enacted. Um,
yeah.
so she runs the festival, and so yes, there are requirements. Actually, if I'm correct, I think they derive some of the requirements from the raw fair requirements for being able to enter into the fair. Um, so yeah, she runs that. You have to have some, minimum sulfur and natural process and healthy grapes. Yeah, but otherwise,
Nice.
for the growth of natural wine in Los Angeles, you this is an opportunity to just cut all the shit out of the way. You can get face to face with a winemaker, and
Yeah.
I know it can be a little bit of a crazy time, and there's a status to it, and there's some things like that. But at the end of the day, if you're a true wine lover, you do not get this experience unless you're traveling to the wine fairs in France, the wine fairs in Italy, or to the actual winery. So it really is unbelievable. I mean, you got Gouda Gao here, you got Christian Cheetah here, we had Streckhoff here, we had some of the most prominent California natural winemakers here, all in the same house. So for somebody like me, it's like the freaking all-star game. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Um, any big ideas that you're interested in right now? Anything that you're geeking out about?
I mean, there's so much to this and so much to what's going on and coming. I think what I'm really looking forward to is California and seeing what's gonna happen here. Um,
Hey, that's great.
I,
Yeah.
I I think you have a lot more people here that now, maybe for lack of better reference, have a more Euro reference for farming and what they want to do, and not necessarily the traditional Paso Napa model of bigger, fuller fruit. I think you're going to start seeing some transitions. Um, I'm also scared a little bit. I think you're going to start seeing, I'm I don't want to get too deep into it, but it's like once you start seeing capitalists come to natural wine, we're going to be in trouble. Once you
Yeah.
start seeing people trying to make money off it, it's going to be a little tricky because there's a lot of stuff. And so, right before we talked, I did read an article today about Truth Wine. Have you heard about Truth Wine? Truth?
Is that the brand name?
No, it's a style,
Oh.
Adam.
Oh.
It's Truth Wine. It's Truth Wine.
Oh. I've tried to coin the term wild wine.
That's a good,
Um
yeah. Wild wine would be good. Yeah, I think
truth wine. That
Truth.
means what
I don't mean shit. Apparently, I don't know. Apparently, it doesn't.
I'm a
It didn't qualify. It didn't have any other requirements to even lean towards it being a natural wine. But it's a health and wellness brand that they're just trying to rebrand, I guess. So be careful out there, people.
interesting.
Be careful out
Yeah,
there.
well, I mean, there's a big news this week with the release of the celebrity wine that was touted as clean wine.
Clean wine. There you go.
Yeah,
Same.
we don't need to go into that, but
Yeah, well, that being said, I would encourage anybody out there, if you're on the search for the good wine, it is about the individual. So it's going to be about that small shop run by one or two people. It's going to be that restaurant that's boutique
yeah,
with the somm. Those are really the places where these wines end up, and I don't know why it just ends up being a through line from the mindset from the farmer to us as the distributor and the buyer and you the
yeah. I
client. So
really, you've mentioned transparency a couple times, and I think if I was speaking to consumers, that would be my big recommendation was like support transparency. So when you find it, like that, you know,
yeah,
promote it, like buy it, promote it, because there isn't. I mean, I've found most times when people aren't transparent, when they don't list ingredients, it's because there's stuff they don't want you to know. It doesn't look good if they are transparent because of that.
they don't want you to know.
Um,
But I
yeah,
think what also I've realized is from a practical standpoint, what we're asking a lot of our people to do is to make an extra stop in their life. And I mean, if you just imagine the old getting off of work at 5, having to go to the store to get dinner, maybe picking up a prescription, running your errands. I'm now asking you to, when you get your wine, to only go to a specific wine shop because that's where these wines are located. And so it does become this really weird, like, how do you make these wines easily accessible to a broader audience? So,
Yeah.
it's kind of this catch 22. At the same time, we don't want to, because these are finite, limited wines that don't have mass production. So I would always give
Right.
them like the metaphor I give some people is, it's a high school kiss. You get it once, it's just a memory, forget it, move on. Like, that's a lot of the wines. A lot of the wines you only
Yeah.
get to see once, and then next vintage. That's it. Move
I
on to the next
actually wrote a blog article called "You will never be able to drink that wine again."
one. Yeah.
Um, it's sort of with that exact sentiment. Like
It's,
it is. There's something, that fleeting ephemerality of wine is part of the beauty of it, and you should,
yes.
the idea that we always want to repeat. We always want to repeat pleasures that we encounter, and
Right.
wine's one of those things where maybe you get a second bottle if you're lucky, and then
No, but
sometimes it's
these are
just a
the lessons.
memory.
These are the lessons of the bottle. Lessons of the bottle. You
Yeah,
embrace it. You enjoy that moment. And
yeah,
hopefully you do exactly what you did when you're up in Oregon, where you're actually able to stop for a moment, be like, nope, this is pretty much it. This is the best. This is the best bite, the best sip, the best
yeah.
sunset, the best company, the best table. And honestly, like, after all the stuff we talk about, all the stuff we try to achieve, that's literally all it comes down to. It comes down to that table, the right people with the right sip and the right bite, the right time and the right moment. And if you get one or two or three or four of those in your life, that's a good life. It's a good life. If you get more than that, fucking lucky as hell, man. But that's really ultimately what I think, your effort with your hands in the dirt, my soft, pretty hands representing the wine. I mean, ultimately, we all get down to that place, and the person that's trying to figure it out and buy it from both of us, if we can all just sit down at that table and have those moments, it's really, really, really what it's all about. That it's all about
Doug, I want the picture that we use for this episode to be your soft, pretty hands.
that. I used to dabble in acting here in Los Angeles years ago, and the last
Oh,
thing
is
I
that what brought you down
nah
here
it
originally?
what it actually, it didn't. It was
Okay.
the dot-com bubble burst in San Francisco.
Oh,
I was living
okay.
in San Francisco. This is early 2000, and I had a friend down here living, and I got laid off and just graduated college. I couldn't do anything, so I came down here and did the old well, I'll give it a try, you know. And
Yeah.
I ended up booking some commercials here and there. But I did the very last thing I did was several years ago, and we
You
we got we
you're a
got
hand model.
well, it was a hand model. No, we got booked to do a commercial, and me and a group of guys got flown to Denver to shoot this commercial with the NASCAR driver. And we go out to a bar that night. We did the rehearsal. We had to shoot the next day, so we go to a bar that night, and even I guess we stuck out in Denver, just being LA guys and looking the way we looked. So this group, this group of young women came over and just were like, "Hey, who are you guys? What are you doing here?" And we're like, "Oh, we're in town working and yada yada." And so one of them just grabs my hand and runs her finger around, like, along my palm, looking for calluses. And then she just gives me the most disgruntled look, throws my hand down. She says, "You don't ride no horse," and walks away. And
That's
ever since
hilarious.
then, I've been, you know, myself pretty
You've been trying
wine.
to toughen up your hands.
Yeah, 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 yeah. After
That's
we get off, I'm gonna go chop some wood after this.
that's hilarious. I was actually a horseback guide in Colorado
No
when I lived in
way.
Colorado.
There you go. You must
Yeah.
have done well then. I probably did better than I did.
That's hilarious. I love that. That's emasculating and
Yeah.
humiliating. That's so great. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I know my
Hey, how
place. Yeah.
how can people get in touch with you, or do you not want people to get in touch with you? How can people,
Um.
learn about Amy Atwood, or,
Yeah.
what do you want to promote here? Give us a URL or an a handle.
I mean, you can. I have a personal Instagram handle you can follow me at. I do some business out there, but it's swimmy at swimmy d.
At
My
Swimmy D.
at Swimmy D, SWIMMYD, and yeah, I mean nothing's really going on right now, but normally through that you could come meet me at some tastings at some shops. Always love
Great. So
discussing.
you promote some of the stuff that you're doing with wine through that?
Yeah, so sometimes we'll get invited to come pour at a shop. I mean, obviously nothing right now, but there's times where um, you can view on my Instagram. You can go back down there and you can see some events from the past. I also would encourage you to follow at Amy Atwood Selections. It's a much more
At
active
Amy Atwood
Instagram.
Selections.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So that's all the kind of incoming news about where you can find our wines, what wines are coming in. Um, some of these wines move super fast, so it's really nice to stay abreast of it. So Amy Atwood Selections on the gram will get you that.
Nice. And she's the website is amyatwood.com basically, right?
That's it. Yeah, amyatwood.com. I
Yeah.
mean, we're mostly a distribution channel. So that being said, thank you for having me on. I don't. I'm
Oh, thank you very much for doing this. I
I
really
don't.
appreciate it,
Yeah, I
Doug.
don't normally get to roll my mouth like this. So thank you. I usually have to be the one listen. Um, but us being a
Awesome.
distribution channel, we're mostly the middle ground. So we would more or less have information pertaining to where and when you could find these wines, as opposed to say where you could buy them, that sort of thing. So yeah, you can't buy direct from us, but we'll tell you where you can get this stuff.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks again. I think that'll let you go now. I've kept you long enough, I think.
Yeah, no,
And
I thanks. I totally ran my mouth. Thank you so much, Adam.
no, no. You've been great. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Doug. And we'll talk again. I can't wait.